Hi everybody, Rob Tapper here, University of Montana. I'm excited to bring a session today to you about jazz improvisation, taking the first step. It can be done by anybody. You don't have to be a jazz genius. You just have to take some steps and be patient, and you can sound pretty good, pretty fast, as well as get your students sounding great. Where do we start? Not only where do we start, but where do we get our students to get the basics? All too often, it's a mysterious formula, and it really doesn't need to be. So there's some things on the board behind me that I think are vital elements to the process that can be done the same way you're working on things in concert band, symphonic band. You can also work on this in jazz ensemble as well. The first thing is time. When we're playing music, nobody likes to hear someone play something that perhaps now you might say, okay, that sounds pretty good, but I think in jazz especially, if you can't feel it, doesn't matter whether the right notes or wrong notes. If you can't feel it, it's not going to have the impact, it's not going to have the desired outcome, and for a young musician, they're not going to be able to feel confident. So, that's going to sound a lot better and feel a lot better to a young musician. The question is, how do you get that taught? How do you get that learned? How do you get that ingrained in what they do? So, first thing is time. We always are taught to hang out with the metronome. I don't actually call it a metronome, I call it the truth. We want to take whatever tempo, if that's our tempo, 1, 2, 3, 4. If that's our tempo, first of all, we want to make sure that we can play along with that. If we want to transfer that concept to be a little bit more swinging and grooving, we need the hi-hat on 2 and 4. So we want to take that tempo, and we want to take the metronome and put it in half. That becomes 2 and 4. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that's really challenging. It takes a long time. My recommendation is to do this also with your ensembles as well. It's not something that's going to happen in a minute, and it's going to take kids a long time to feel that and hear that and know what to listen for. But there are so many figures in what we play that line up with the 2 and 4 of the hi-hat that's going to get them to feeling better about what they play, and it's going to sound and feel better as well. So, time, making sure we have the truth. The truth does not lie. Make sure we have the truth. Getting ourselves to understand the basic nomenclature of what chord symbols are. A lot of us out there understand how to build that vertically, but then there's a chasm between that and the patterns that you can play and or the scales that go along with the chord-scale relationships. So we'll chat about that for a second. Also, using our circle of fourths, or in theory, our circle of fifths, to go around and make sure, just like we do in concert band, to make sure that we have a solid understanding of some basic and simple shapes. And then we'll talk about the S's of soloing in just a little bit. So we have our major 7 chord, which you'll see as a triangle 7 or MAJ 7. And as I've said in other videos and other presentations, I'm not a big fan of trying to play the entire scale. I think that's because I play trombone, and it's a little more challenging as opposed to trumpet or saxophone or guitar or piano. That seems to be a little bit easier to get the whole line. With trombone, especially a young trombonist, the range of the instrument gets to be very, very cumbersome. So, our major 7 sounds, our dominant 7 sounds, and our minor 7 sounds. Being able to delineate between the 3 of those without necessarily worrying about the 7s for now, but becoming oriented to those sounds and shapes we're playing. So, we take our truth and we put it on our desired tempo of 100. We get the metronome, we get the hi-hat on 2 and 4, on 50, 1, 2. So with our major sound, just playing some simple shapes. 1, 2, 3. So we take that simple shape, 1, 2, 3, 5, and we go around the circle of fourths. Rest if you want. And you can take out the rest. So on and so forth. Really great way to build the foundation of sounds and create some shapes. And these shapes are used in jazz all over the place in the history of jazz. So then we go to our minor 7 chord. So then that third changes and becomes a flat third. But meanwhile, we keep the same shape. I'm a big fan of making sure they understand what it is and what it isn't. So if they understand how to construct 1, 2, 3, 5 in major, and they know a little bit about their chromatic scale, half steps, they should be able to play the same thing in minor. So we get to our hi-hat, truth, 3. So on and so forth. So you can see and hear, hopefully you can hear the impact that can have on a young musician going through that building foundation. And it sounds pretty good as well. So now that we've gone around our circle of fourths and we've done our simple shapes, what goes up must come down. We take this simple shape and we reverse it so that we're going downward now. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 3, 2, 1. These are great shapes, great patterns to work on any instrument. So we put our truth back on. 2, and you'll notice a little trick there. You end on the 5th of the next chord coming up. Do the same thing with minor. And I would really recommend, even at these very early stages, I'd really recommend taking some rhythms and putting them to those sounds to get the young players feeling 2 and 4, get the feeling of swing and a groove. So on and so forth. Can make them sound really good, really fast. And if they play that chord, and they hear that chord in time, they sound really good, really fast. So taking those shapes, 1, 2, 3, 5, and then what goes up must come down, 5, 3, 2, 1. There's a ton of stuff there to work on. Next thing is, we want to maybe enhance that shape a little bit more, get it more of a little bit of a line. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our major shape. Sounds a little pedestrian, but it's a great thing to start with going around our circle of fourths. So then we change it to minor. And you can really get them to own those figures. Get them to own them, get them to feel good about those figures right away. So those are usually just these 2 patterns, these 2 shapes. You've got 3 or 4 ways to go about giving some foundation to the sound. What do we just do? We just accomplished something to play over that, and over that, without really digging too deeply into the 6s and the 7s and 9s. We can talk about color tones using what we just did without having to get too heady on them. I find that simplicity is really gold. Keeping things super simple, taking them where they are, not trying to over-explain anything. I think, as human beings, we have a propensity to desire to have people know how much we know. And I think when we're explaining this information staying as close to where they are is really important. So we're going to be working with a chord progression, really common chord progression. It's going to be in concert pitch, so hopefully we can take that information and you can relate it to whatever instrument you specifically play. I have sheets that are also going to be linked to this as well, so you can look at everything we do. I'll have written out for you, so you can go through all of that step by step. Make sure you're feeling good about everything we're doing. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to get in touch with me. Love to hear from you. So here's our chord progression, our 4-bar chord progression. First thing we want to do is make sure we got the truth lined up. Let's go maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. So that 4 bars over and over. We've heard that a ton of times. First thing is, I will say, really important to develop some basic piano skills. Taking the time to do this will help you a lot. It'll offer you an opportunity to work with your student musicians without having to find recordings of chord changes. Even if just simple things, playing the root of the chord in time is going to be super valuable, which leads us to the first step of our steps to learning a tune. We want to play the roots of the chords, and we can play them in whole notes, we can play them in quarter notes as a bass player. We'll do it 2, 3, Seems simple, right? But getting a young musician to do that establishes what we call harmonic rhythm. How long a chord lasts before it moves on. You can play games with your young musicians. You do things such as, what's the harmonic rhythm of this progression? So I have 4 bars of one chord before we move on. And all too often, it happens all the time. The young musician stands up, starts improvising, and they look at you like, am I done? Am I done? And you're like, no, keep going, keep going. No, you're done. You were done 3 measures ago. That's getting them to understand and feel that harmonic rhythm. So playing the quarter notes and doing it with a whole ensemble. This is stuff that you can do with a small group, with a big band. Get everybody doing this. It's really going to be beneficial. So the next thing we want to do is we want to approach our thirds. We want to be able to get to the thirds. So now, going back to our basic building of these chords, I'm not going to get super fancy. I'm not going to deal with altered scales. I'm not going to deal with anything. Just some basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, major, minor. For now. Now, some theorists might have some issue with this, but I'd rather, again, be simple and take them where they are. If they know how to play the first 5 notes of a minor scale, fantastic. So we put the truth back on, and we're going to now target our thirds. So we're going to play root third. 3. Nice and simple. The great thing about that is you can hear the chords going by just by targeting those thirds. What goes up must come down. Playing the thirds, then the root. 2, 3. Again, you can hear the chords. And the great thing about this is you can have half the ensemble play roots then thirds, half the ensemble play thirds then roots, and you still hear that sound going on. So we've got our thirds. Now we've got to figure out the fifth. And instead of trying to play the whole scale, maybe you want to play the whole scale, I would try to figure out the triads. That's going to give them a ton of information. It's also going to give them a ton of information here. So we can play the first 5 notes of this, and then we'll pull out the triads. First 5 notes. Now triad. What goes up must come down. And the wheels are probably spinning right now. Wow, I could have a third of the band doing roots and thirds, a third of the band doing thirds and sevenths, a third of the band doing 1, 3, 5. Then switch it up into 4 different groups. 1, 3, 3, 1, 1, 3, 5, 5, 3, 1. Mix them all up. And again, spending time on these solid fundamentals is going to get them feeling and hearing. And if we're doing it in time, everybody's doing it in time, then there's going to be some really great things happening. And then you want to mess with rhythms. So instead of just doing the very vanilla quarter notes and or eighth notes or half notes, you want to start mixing things up a little bit. Always, again, always with time. Always with time. Going down. And you probably can come up with 10 to 12 different rhythms to do with all of those. Now, if we stop there, they're still going to be successful. So if I'm going to improvise, just using that information to simple, but how often do you hear a middle school kid actually make chord changes? And they can do it. They can definitely do it. I came up with something a while ago that I think is a really effective tool when working with young improvisers. Getting them, while they're improvising, to focus on even 1 or 2 things. And sometimes when you can get yourself in sort of the tunnel vision and not worry about playing in time, doing the right notes, right rhythms, right articulations, just get them to focus on a couple of things that can be really valuable. So, develop this thing called the S's of soloing. And you can probably get 20 of these if you want them, but here are just some basic elements to soloing that I think are important that you can explain pretty quickly and codify in a way that they can get it and use it fast. When you solo, you want to play strong. Period. When you solo, you want to sell it. You want to make sure that no matter what you're playing, whether you're playing right notes or wrong notes, doesn't matter, right or wrong, it's going to be strong, and they're going to sell it. Style. We always want to play in the right style. If we're dealing with swing, we want to be dealing with legato for the most part. If we're dealing with more straight eighth bossa nova, we want to deal with more articulations, but make sure they're playing in the right style. Space. Leave some space. All too often, young improvisers, and myself included, will play, and we just feel like it's the last time we're ever going to play something, and we have to play everything we know. Doesn't have to be the case. When you solo, get them to stand. Get them used to that. Even in a rehearsal, that adrenaline push of standing up in a rehearsal will carry it a long way when they actually perform. Another aspect of that also is to use microphones in rehearsals. When you can start getting towards a performance, whatever that performance may be, set up a microphone. If you don't have access to a sound system, even setting up a faux microphone, a fake one, so they can stand up and at least get the idea of what that feels like by standing up, by playing into a microphone. Also, when they're done soloing, take a quick little bow, let everybody know that they appreciate their applause. Get them to stand in rehearsal. Syncopate. If they're playing everything on a downbeat, it'll sound fine, but obviously it's going to be a little bit pedestrian in what they do. As soon as they add one syncopated note, it makes a world of difference. Say it again. All too often with young musicians, they play something and they move on to whatever's next. They should feel free to play something, say it again, make it important. Now, you might be saying, but you can't do that. You're already here, but you're playing the same thing over that. Yes, that's a great element. Say it again is a great element to do. when you're working on specific chords one at a time, and even on a blues. And you can do it on this if you want to get into the depth of the theory aspect of it, but get them to play something. Have them play something, stop, and then have them play it again. And if they can't remember it, it's not going to have the rhythmic and melodic depth that I think they need to be successful. Sound. And I wrote sound twice up here for two different reasons. One, they always should be thinking about their sound being great, of course, right? Sound, the other aspect of the sound is, who are they trying to sound like? If they don't have a hero, then they're firing blind. If they're a baseball player, they love baseball, they want to be on the baseball team, and they don't know who their favorite right fielder is, more likelihood that they're not going to be on the team when the cuts come. So who they want to sound like, find a hero. Sequence. Great way to work on things. Also, you can take that information to your concert bands. Sequencing things based off of major scales, based off of minor scales, it will exponentially give them stuff to play that sounds great, feels great. And then synchronize. And this was a tricky one, but the synchronization of playing in time, making sure that they are playing in time. That's a big, long, fancy word for playing in time, but it's a really important one. Targeting the sevenths. This is tricky, especially from the standpoint of young musicians not having range. If you think about the range of these chords, going from roots to sevenths of all these chords, you're getting probably about an octave and a sixth. And if you've got a seventh grader that's playing trumpet, an octave and a sixth might be tricky. So I like to target the sevenths, at least starting off wise. I like to target the sevenths going down, going from root to seventh. Sounds funny, and I don't spend a tremendous amount of time on it in comparison to working up the sound, working up the shape. But it is still valuable. So playing roots and sevenths. So there's some funny sounds in there, but you put that together with all of the other things we've done previously, and you're going to hear the whole chord. You're going to hear 1, 3, 5, 7, every single from every instrument in that ensemble. So now we get away from the roots and the sevenths. Now we go back to our shapes. And if we remember back to the beginning, our simple shape of 1, 2, 3, 5, now we start to make some music. 1, 2, 3, 5. Then we go down, and let's add a rhythm to that. Big. Now, for all you theoreticians and jazz people out there, I'm using the natural 9 on the D7 chord. I'm not using the flat 9. My apologies. But again, I think it's easier to give them some ABCs instead of right away throwing some yes buts in there. That's just going to make them a little fearful of what they really don't know. So now we get to the good stuff. Chromatic approaches. Jazz gold. Putting a half step in front of whatever you really want to be playing is going to give a lot of linear motion to what you're doing. And getting young improvisers to use these half steps really gets them to sound amazing pretty quickly. So we're going to put a half step below each one of the roots of these chords with the triad as well. And you can hear the pull. There becomes some tension and release to what we're doing. Then we're going to take that and we're going to consolidate that down into again, always playing in time. Now, chromatic approaches to the fifth. Instead of approaching the root by a half step, we're approaching the fifth, and then what goes up must come down. Right? So now what we can do is we can mix that all up together. Check this out. 2, 3. No information that we haven't already gone over. I played everything. Now, getting a young improviser to compute that all is going to be tricky. That's where we have to be really sequential in how we warm up. And think about, oh, you can do that same warm up in concert band. Start with your B flat major scale and start building triads on your B flat major scale. You've probably done some of this diatonic triad work before. So B flat, starting on the A, half step below B flat, then a half step below C, then half step below D, half step below E flat, half step below F. I would say, dare I say, any 7th or 8th grader could probably do that if it's explained in a very slow and sequential manner. And then do the same thing approaching the fifths. That's just on B flat major. Think about all the times you're going to find a C minor 7 chord or a D minor 7 chord or an E flat major 7 chord. And you've got twice as much stuff now to play on that one sound. So now we can mix all that stuff together. We play over the chord changes. Some nice simple patterns I added. One thing I neglected to say was taking these triads and putting them into permutation. So instead of playing just 1-3-5 or 5-3-1, put the 3 first. So G minor 1-3-5, 5-3-1, 3-5-1, and going through the chord changes like that. So 3-5-1. And those creating those sounds. Again, some of it does sound a little vanilla, a little pedantic, but it is effective, and it really gives a young improviser the confidence of building those chords. The last thing we're going to cover today, guide tones. The thirds and the sevenths of each of these chords is so important to hear. We've gone over them. We've hit them all. We've targeted them all. But understanding, getting a young improviser, understanding how those thirds and sevenths move throughout a chord progression, there it is. That's the final answer. So we have G minor 7. I'm going to play the root, the third, and the seventh. So we literally can hear that chord. I go to C7, root, third, seventh. So just those two chords themselves. Now that segues back to taking the time to learn a little bit about jazz piano. If you can do what I just did over these chord changes, just the roots, the thirds and sevenths, your value to your jazz education program has just exponentially become amazing. So we play the thirds and the sevenths. And what we want to do with those thirds and sevenths is we want to play the third and then the seventh of each chord, and then go to the third and seventh of the next chord. And what we're going to find is that we end up with voice leading. So third, seventh, third, seventh, third, seventh, third, seventh. So doing it sounds a little angular. Why? Because we're dealing with tritones in our dominant 7 chords. But if we take that same process and we play it on our horn, our instrument, you can hear the chord changes going by. And if you think if you have a big band rehearsal, almost at this point, every single member of that big band can be doing something different that we just did. And you're going to hear all the chords go by. So little Sally starts off with just playing the roots, then Jimmy plays the roots and the thirds, then you go around the whole ensemble. Next time through, Sally's playing the roots and the thirds, Jimmy's playing triads, so on and so forth. So we've got the thirds and sevenths, the guide tones of these chords. Then you want to also make sure that you're getting the other side of the guide tones, which is playing the seventh first. And there's a lot of common tone activity that happens when we're playing guide tones. So learning the guide tones, playing along with those guide tones. You don't want to build a solo just on guide tone, but if you're using those guide tones, passing through these chords, and especially that 7-3 motion, that's unrecognizable. It really wants to resolve. So if you can, using triads and chord tones, and then that 7-3 motion, the improviser's going to start making some things really, really happen. Thanks for joining me today on this improv session, Taking the First Step. There are so many resources out there, individuals, things on the internet and websites. Feel free to dig into that. And also, I'd love to hear from you if any comments at all. Big thank you to Heather Adams for directing this and putting this all together to get it up on YouTube so you can have this opportunity to check this information out. And again, please, if any comments at all, love to hear from you. Keep swinging.
Good job, girl.